Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. I think we have all 8 sites joining us tonight. Welcome to the session on vegetable production. And tonight our presenter is Terry Nennich from Extension. He has an office here in Crookston, and he's presenting from the Crookston campus. And so with no further ado, I will turn it over to Terry. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you very much, Linda. It's always great to talk on this particular topic of vegetable production. And I'm going to go right ahead and hopefully we can put the slide up. Yep.
Ask if they see it.
Can everybody see this?
See a slide, a blue slide?
Because everybody's muted.
Sarah went to check because for some reason the Staples site is what we're looking
Okay.
at instead of.
If Staples can hear me, raise your hand. Okay, there we go. Okay, I think we can go on.
Okay.
Okay,
We don't have, can't
As
show
soon
it.
as we can.
okay. I think we're going to go ahead and get started here in the essence of time here. So welcome everybody. Tonight's topic is principles of vegetable production, and we hope we can get some lively discussion going on here as the evening progresses here. If you have a question, just chime in and we will deal with it here. So, I always tell the gardeners and the commercial growers that this is probably the most dangerous time of the year when these seed catalogs come out. They pretty well guarantee you everything and promise you everything, and many of them forget of where we're actually located. But I just wanted to put on here a few of the catalogs that are readily available in the production. And before I talk more about this, you should have a handout. And I'm going to actually start in about 5 or 6 pages. And you'll see one that says drip irrigation for season extension. Then the next page after that is where this presentation actually starts. They're a little bit out of order, and I'll kind of guide you through them. So, but anyway, there are several seed companies out there. Some of them are breeders, but most of them are wholesalers, and they retail a lot of seed here. Some of them that may be of interest to you are Johnny Selected Seed, that breeds for cool season production. Seedway is actually a division of Beju Seeds, which are actually in Holland, and they breed cool season crops for early production in our particular climate here. And Rogers, actually, you can't buy their seeds direct, but I have them up here because they're a major breeder of fruit and vegetable seeds. And then Burpee, a lot of you heard about Burpee. They actually are in the home garden business too. They kind of have a wide array of different seeds. And then we look at Harris Moran and Harris. Their claim to fame is that they actually do a lot of breeding in the warm season crops, sweet corn, tomatoes, but especially cucurbits, which are basically melons and that type of thing. So. But, we all get hung up on this thing here. Some of us try to look at growing the biggest radish or the biggest turnip on the block here. And that's a lot of fun here. I just show you some pictures here. This one was actually taken in Alaska, believe it or not here. I couldn't stop it. It always seemed if I was getting ahead. And this can really affect a lot of people, but we just want you to know there's help on the way here. BigVeggiesAnonymous.com. And if you really have a problem with this, you can get onto this website and they'll cool you down a little bit. And you may be able to also deal with a few people out there that go ahead and have these same type of problems here. But I think as we kind of get on a more serious note tonight, we need to think about, why are we actually here? Why are we doing this? And there's a lot of different reasons for different people. Some of you are looking at growing your own food and becoming part of the great local food movement. Others are doing this for a refresher course. And we have several that are actually looking at getting into fruit and vegetable production, looking at farmers markets or something of that nature. But, so are we looking at relaxation or therapy? Or maybe we just want to keep busy? Or my favorite one is, it's much better than playing golf. or I like a real challenge, and taste and health is a big thing. But some of you may make all or part of your financial living through this or kind of plan on it too. So whatever you're into, there'll be something here tonight for each one of you here. So whether you're looking at raising vegetables with some monstrous machine like this, or you're actually looking at going ahead with a machine like this here, the thing I really need to press here tonight is that all the same principles apply. And that's extremely important here. Matter of fact, people who are operating with a machine like this may have some advantages because you can probably get things done a little bit more timely here. I want to point out on this next slide here where we're actually located and remind people of this. You can see by the dot here is kind of where a lot of our producers are at, but we cover that whole northern part of the state here. And we look at our location, and the part of Minnesota that we are located in is temperature zones 2 and 3. And to give you, just to remind you, and maybe after this nice winter we will have to remind you, that Zone 2 is classified as low winter temperatures of hitting of a minus 50 degrees, at least 1 year out of 3. And we have an 85 to 90 day growing season, and that's defined as frost-free. So and why it varies from year to year, this is probably what our average is. And then we get a little bit more south. We have people here from Staples and Fergus. Zone 3, we have low winter temperatures of a minus 35 with a 90 to 100 day growing season. And the bottom line is up here, we are heat deficient as far as growing most of our vegetable crops. And there are some companies that deal with the cool season crops, but the majority of them are looking at warm season crops where they can sell a lot of seed and make themselves more successful that way. So we have to think about things that we're doing different than warmer climates. And we're going to talk quite a bit about that, but how we actually go ahead and farm or garden is going to make or break us in this part of the country. And you know, it seems like I know a lot of gardeners who have been trying for years and years and years, you know, and hoping that they're going to hit it lucky, and they do 1 year out of 5 or 1 year out of 10. But hopefully when we're done with this here first section here, you'll have some ideas here on a little bit more success. So let's start out with a plan. You know, I always say you need a plan. Even if it's the wrong plan, you'll have something to change. So as you design your vegetable garden, whether it's large or small, you need to think about, you know, work requirements. And as you develop this, you know, how much time this is really going to take. You know, if you're going to make it a vocation, that's one thing. Part-time, you know, is another thing here. And then preferred vegetables. Now that can be interpreted two ways. One, which vegetables do I like to eat? And if you're a gardener, that's great. On the other hand, if you're looking at farmers markets or some other aspect of commercial production, the preferred vegetables is what your customers want, which is a major thing. And that goes into consumption preferences. But when I talk about consumption, I'm looking about quantity that you can move or you can sell, and a little bit of, you know, how much is in that market. We're going to talk about space requirements, but also crop rotation strategies. And where the big producers that I deal with are always in trouble is with rotation. For most vegetables, we really like to see at least a 4-year rotation to get rid of a lot of the root diseases that come in and that type of thing. And a lot of our big potato growers and that are down to a 2-year rotation, and you can do that, but it takes a tremendous amount of chemicals, and that's kind of what we're trying to get away from with this local foods movement, to produce a healthy product. So we're kind of going back to where we were maybe when my dad farmed. We don't have to accept everything that they were doing, but a lot of the things they did was because there was some common sense and some reasoning behind them. The first thing we want to talk about is a good location. This is one thing that'll make or break you. On the right-hand part of the slide, we list some things that are what I would consider extremely important. We start out with well-drained soil. There are a lot of soils, especially in the western part of the state, that are not well-drained. The rule of thumb is if you get a 2-inch rain, you should be able to get out and work it in 24 to 36 hours if the crop is ready and you get that type of rain. So you really want to think of well-drained. There are things you can do, such as some tiling or some ditching, if you have that type of problem. But the thing you have to remember is we're not looking at acres and acres and acres for most of us to do this, so you should be able to find a good spot somewhere, you know, in your garden area or your field, you know, that is. And it's really interesting because if you look at most vegetable farms now, they're picking out the better soils and the better slopes, and they're actually using the rest to do things like specialty flowers and that type of thing for beneficial insects to cut the cost of you know, production down and just fight insects that way. And then we look at little or no slope. Well, we actually like a little bit of slope, but we don't want 6%. We just want a little bit of slope to get the water out of there, help drain, help pick up some sunlight. Good sun exposure is important. You know, there's a rule of thumb with vegetables that I think is true for almost all vegetables, is that your yield is reduced proportionally with the amount of shade. So just for example, if you're in an area that has a lot of trees and you have 25% shade, you lose 25% of your yield. Just keep it in mind. I'm close to a water source. We're going to spend quite a bit of time in this this lecture on irrigation. And because to me, we look at them 85 days or 90 days, maybe 100 days, wherever you're at, losing 3 or 4 days because the plants go into a semi-dormancy can be extremely critical. So we want water. And then protected from wind. Okay. So what are some of the things that we really want to be careful of? Compacted soil. Close to roadway or driveway. You can end up with a lot of dust on your crops. Maybe if you're growing carrots or something like that, it's not that critical. Close to buildings. Something to really think about here if you're looking at shade here. And black walnut trees can cause a lot of trouble with a lot of crops. I mean, there's not a tremendous amount of black walnut trees, but if you're around black walnut trees, especially with tomatoes, peppers, solanaceae crops, we really want to rethink that. So, a little bit more on location here. Pick the best soil, and if it's not been worked for years, you will have to take at least a year to prepare it. If you're just starting with this, you may be wanting to do just a very, very small amount next year and start getting this soil back into production. That year is going to build up the microbiology of the soil, but the other big thing, you're going to be able to control the weeds and get them weeds out of there because it is a problem. Consider expansion if you're interested in that with your location. Consider the in and out access of your yard. And one thing you need to think about with location, and we actually do a whole couple-hour session on this, is population. If you're considering activities such as pick your own, such as fun on the farm with pumpkins, that type of thing here, what's the population? And we actually have done a lot of research on how far you can draw people successfully, and it is quite a ways. So even if you live in an area that maybe isn't as populated as you wish, you can go ahead and you know, and still do well here. If you're in a smaller type of a garden, this is one thing you really want to kind of a layout here, and you can see the little insignia up here that shows you north. And you know, the trellis crops, if you're going to trellis some crops, even trellising them 3 or 4 feet, is going to give you a lot of wind breakage out of the north. And that north wind will actually, you know, stunt crops. If we get cold, that's where a lot of it's going to come from, okay? And then our perennial crops, we usually like on the eastern part of your garden or your field. This would be things like asparagus, rhubarb, that type of thing, that you like to break the dormancy very slowly in the spring. Then on the western part, you want your spring crops where that sun's going to come up, warm them up, and get them seeds out of the ground for the early ones. And then for the south here, which I don't have on here, then you're looking at some real warm season crops. And this is kind of ideal. If you're in a big field, that's really big, it may not really pertain to you, but just kind of keep this in mind here because one crop will usually definitely benefit another one. Okay, so soil test. Let's kind of get started now. So when you start your garden, you're probably going to want to start with a soil test, especially in this part of the country. As I show on the bottom of the slide, there's companies like AgRise, the University of Minnesota labs that do the testing. And I often get the question here, well, which is the best lab? Well, I like to tell them the University of Minnesota, but actually that really isn't the case because all the companies pretty well use the same techniques to actually test the soil. Where you come into play is some of the recommendations that they may make may not be all in line with each other. And another publication that we can get a hold of that I probably should have brought is the Commercial Nutrient Guide for Fruits and Vegetables in Minnesota. It's a green covered book, and I do have some extra copies because we just reprinted. I can probably get to Linda for this in the fruit class. But basically, it will tell you exactly the amount of nutrients that you need to apply with different soil test readings to different crops. And you may have to go to your local county agent or contact the company that's doing the fertilizer analysis, or pardon me, the soil analysis to really get it. But there is a good guide there that you can use here. So, so what do we really want to test for? Well, they have what they call a basic test. And these are the kind of the things that we're really after. The basic test is going to tell you the pH, which is the acidity of the soil. It's going to tell you the phosphorus levels, the potash levels, the organic matter levels, and the soil type of how much sand or clay or whatever's actually in there. So it's good to do that. If you really want to get involved and get right down to the nitty-gritty, you can do a comprehensive test. And a comprehensive test will usually run around $35, but it will give you all the nutrients in the soil from boron, copper, magnesium, and so forth and so forth. Usually what we tell people when you're starting out, you're breaking new ground, and you're not familiar with your soil, it's probably good to do a comprehensive test the first time. Now, the micronutrient level of the soil probably aren't going to change drastically, so once you got that in hand, you're probably pretty well okay to do some, just basically the basic soil test, which is $7 to $10. But, as they say, I wouldn't leave home without one because, and it's not only the home gardeners and the small people, it's all the way on up to the sugar beet people, to the high tunnel people. There seems to be a real drag about testing soil, and I don't know why. But that'll be the first when a grower calls and has fertility problems, and I talk to him. The first thing I ask, and 80% of the time is no, he didn't have time to do that. But he did have time to spend thousands of dollars on seed and other stuff. So just kind of keep that in mind. Preparing the soil here. So we're moving on here. The soil should be friable, well-drained, and high in organic matter. And, the clay content, extremely high clay content will cause problems with seeding emergence and drainage sometimes, but you can comprehend that, or pardon me, you can change that with a bunch of organic matter, other type of products here, which I'm sure they discussed in the soil section here. So compost, peat, and other amendments can improve garden performance. So the one thing that is, I'm going to back up here. The one thing that's extremely important is stay out of the soils when they're wet. If that soil is compacted at all in the spring, you are basically done with production for 1 year. And there's nothing you can do if you work that soil that's too wet and it gets little balls in it. It's going to cut your nutrient exchange capacities down so low that the plant will always be stunted and you don't know if it's going to drain well. And I know myself, it's so exciting to get out there the first warm day of spring and get the old tiller started and get fired up, and then you kind of look, boy, it's awful muddy here. I got 4 inches of mud on the bottom of my shoes. Well, if you ever collect any mud on the bottom of your shoes, it's time to really stay out of there, you know. And you just really need to wait here because that soil, you can see in this picture how nice it works up. And whether it's clay or sand, it really kind of works up like that. The heavier the soil, usually the less grace period you have to go in and work it. But, you know, that's just kind of the way it is. So that's one of the keys. Yeah.
You use the term friable?
Uh-huh.
What is that?
That means that it's really loose. You can just run it through your fingers. Any other questions from any of the other sites? Okay. We'll continue on to seeds and maintaining seed quality. And try to buy what only you need. And I didn't put this chart in here, but there is an easily accessible chart that gives you what we call the viability of seeds. And the viability of seeds is important because some crops, and I think of like onions and a few of these others, the seed is viable for a very, very short time. You may get 2 years out of it. And then you can move into some crops that are, you know, like sweet corn. You may be able to get, you know, 5, 6, 7 years out of how long the seed will grow and be viable. So the bottom line here, try to buy only what you need, and I'd think seriously about looking at that chart. How you store seed is extremely important. You know, you don't want any humidity around it, that type of thing here. And, you know, if you're in doubt, it's so easy to conduct a simple germination test. All you really do is take a wet paper towel and wet it down and put a few seeds in there. We usually like to do it in segments of 10, so 10 to 100, so you can easily take a percentage. So if you put 100 seeds in there, which would be a very big test, but just using that for an example, and 80% of them grow, or 80 of them come up, you know you have a 80% germination rate. You know, unfortunately, if 2 or 3 comes up, you know you've got some problems. And the reason we do that isn't the fact that you have to throw the seed away, but if you would come up with like a 50% germination rate, because your seed is older, you just have to double the amount of seed you use in a running foot. So you can still use the seed, but just be careful that it, you know, you have enough plants there to go ahead and produce the crop that you really need here. I do need to just make one comment here. The poorer the germination in bigger seeds, like sweet corn, the poorer germination percent, probably the more stunted the stalk is going to be. So usually we say when you get into the bigger seeds, if the germination gets under 70% with sweet corn, that type of thing, unless it's really young seed, you better really think about just throwing it out and start over again. Because at that rate, you can have some effect on the actual yield. And this is just a shot here, I don't know how well this shows up here, of the water movement in high quality seed, and that's really the key, as compare the water movement in poor quality seed. Seems like one of the more common questions I get today is saving the seed from the crop. There's a big movement out there with heirlooms, and there's so many things we can have fun with, you know, but what should we save and what shouldn't we save? Well, on the left-hand side here, you'll see a few things here. Saving the seed from the crop. Open pollinated varieties. Most heirlooms are definitely open pollinated. They're not crossed. So that means that most of the time you're going to get seed that's just like the ones that you planted, going to produce the same crop. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute or two. Quickly dry and package. Drying the seed is extremely important from the standpoint that if it's not down to 6 to 10% moisture or less, it's probably going to grow in the package. So again, you want to only select the healthy and biggest fruit. And you know, if you run into trouble, just go ahead and buy new seeds for crops that have known to have pure quality. Now, the flipping of it is, hybrid varieties. We always get into this discussion here because you can often turn a hybrid variety into an open pollinated variety just by replanting it several times. It eventually come to a consensus or an equilibrium of what that product is going to look like. It may take a few years. It isn't the fact that the hybrid isn't going to grow. Because you got two crosses, and so the parents, but what you plant may not represent either one of the parents here. Cross-pollination is a big thing here. With most crops that are leafy crops, especially the cucurbits, they will cross-pollinate. We know that bees can go 2 miles, and we know that they do work them type of crops. The thing is, if the crops do cross-pollinate, you won't know that until you plant that seed. It will have no effect on the crop that's growing. So if you have and this is how they do a lot of fun with gourds, but if you have, for instance, a gourd here that's of one color, and over your neighbor has some that's another color, they can cross-pollinate it, but it won't affect this year's crop. But when you plant that seed, it changes the genetics, and then you can go ahead and maybe something you want, or maybe that it isn't what you want. So it's a lot of fun. The one thing I have to really caution people about, especially with tomatoes, vine crops, most solanaceae crops, which would be tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, is we have a lot of root diseases. The fusariums, and especially some of the viruses that are actually carried on the surface of the seed. So if you're dealing with them crops, there's always that possibility that you could bring that disease in. So there is directions on how to treat the seed if you have that problem. I'm not treating with chemicals. We use hot water baths, different ways, but treated seed is important. If you know that the seed came out of really healthy plants, you probably won't have that problem. But just something to think about here, especially with the diseased fruit. And you pull that tomatoes out of ground that's been put in tomatoes for many years, them root diseases can cause a lot of grief, especially the viruses. Any questions at all on saving seed?
I switch from side to side with my tomato beds or something. That's okay.
You mean to transplant? I mean to...
Plant one side, one
Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, the question was, this gentleman plants tomatoes from one side of his field to the other. You can start picking up some diseases with solanaceae crops. At some point, you're probably going to have to go 4 years. Or, but you can tell right away, you'll start picking up some diseases. Okay, methods of planting. This is, a question that a lot of people ask. They see these seed packets and they open them up and they say, geez, I wonder how deep I should really plant these. And the seed packets will say something like 1/4 to 1 inch, or something that gives you kind of take them off the hook. But as a general rule of thumb, the planting depth should be 4 to 5 times the lateral width of the seed. And if the seed is square, well, the seed is square. You just have to take the lateral width and do the best you can with it. But that's kind of a good rule of thumb here. If you're planting early in the season, you can go a little bit more shallow. A little bit later in the season, a little bit deeper. You can collect moisture and you have a little bit of heat then. But a good rule of thumb you want to remember is 4 to 5 times the lateral width of the seed. When to plant is a real question here. We have a lot of people that move up here from the southern part of the state, or southern part of the country, I should say, and we always get a few of them warm days, the 1st of April, and boy, they're ready to buy their tomato plants, and they go into their greenhouses where they buy them, and I want my tomato plants, and I'm going to put them in today because it's 75 degrees. Well, you know, so that brings up the question, when to plant here. Different classes of vegetable seeds germinate at different soil temperatures, and that can mean a lot. Because the soil temperature within a group of vegetables will control how long it takes the seed to come up or possibly rot in the ground. The first classification is we have cool season crops, and we like a soil temperature of at 2 to 3 inches of 40 degrees. Now, these crops are carrots, lettuce, cold crops, which is radish, broccoli, cabbage, dill, asparagus, rhubarb. And while they don't germinate really fast at 40 degrees, they do germinate. Some crops like carrots will actually germinate at 32.1 degrees. Does anybody know, according to the Knott's Book of Handbooks, how long it takes the carrots to germinate at 32.1 degrees? No guesses? 136 days. I think carrots are one of the few that will survive that long in the germination process. So the point here is we get into the next 2 sections of cool season crops. We definitely want to make sure that we're not putting them in too cold a soil. Because just because the temperature warms up doesn't mean the soil instantaneously warms up. And the growth comes from the temperature of the soil than the temperature of the air, even though the two are extremely closely related. This is a picture of some good-looking crops there. Then we go to our mid-season crops, and we look at a 50-degree soil temperature. And some sweet corns, and we're going to get into sweet corn later, but it's just a few of what we call the SU sweet corns, the non-sugary type sweet corns, what we call the older varieties that will germinate in 50-degree soil temperatures, and you really want it more than that for most corns here. But then we look at cauliflower and peas and spinach here. In this section of crop here, you really want to look at 50 degrees to really get them up and going here. Sometimes, if the temperature looks like it's going to warm up over the next 2 or 3 days, you can put them into some cooler temperature, but hopefully you don't want them to stay there very long. And then we look at our warm season germinating crops, and we like a minimum of a 60-degree soil temperature. And this actually, I have some sweet corns down here, but actually it should be most of the sweet corns. And then we look at melons and cucumbers. Probably the 2 biggest offenders, if melons and cucumbers are planted in a soil of under 60 degrees and preferably 65 degrees, they will rot. And if you actually raise transplants and put them in soil temperatures under 60 to 65 degrees, the plant will become stunted and probably just rot out at the soil level. So them are 2 that you really need. String beans is another one. They'll just lay in the soil and rot until that magic 60 degrees, 65 degrees. Lima beans, tomato seed, and pepper seed. It's really interesting. Tomato seed needs a little bit warmer temperatures than tomato roots to actually germinate, and I look at that as a thing in nature where they can protect their seed to keep it in dormancy longer than the plant needs it, so that all the seeds just don't germinate, so nature can hold some back into the soil. So these are some of the major crops that you'll be dealing with that you do not want to plant in cool soils, and I know a lot of people do, especially the vine crops. Any question on soil temperatures and crops? Okay. What happens if I plant too deep or too shallow? Well, we talked about using the seed that's about 5 times or thereabouts the lateral width of planting 5 times the lateral width of the seed here. You're going to end up with desiccation, poor root development, some very poor plant structure. You know, it can be influenced by mild soil moisture conditions. You know, you just got to really be careful with that. And of course, too deep here, as the picture on the right shows, poor emergence, delayed emergence, susceptible to soil pathogens, and less competitive with weeds. The one thing I did mention about leaving that seed in the soil any longer than it needs to germinate is the soil pathogens really come fast. And they're in the soil. There's nothing we can do about it. We have to live with that. All the way from the Oomycetes group, which actually attacks, to some of the basics. They get into the seed, and even if they grow up, they can be stunted. So the idea is to get that seed in the ground and get that seed up as fast as you possibly can. And we'll be talking a little bit about that here later. So we're going to move on into direct seeding here. And direct seeding basically means that we actually take the seed and we put it directly into the soil here. And there's a lot of different ways to do it depending on the crop here. We can do row planting here, as is on your left, where things are planted in the same row. A straight row, probably the most common, used for carrots, beets, beans, just a lot of crops. They're easy to take care of here. And hill planting here, people do that. They can, especially if you're on heavier soils, you can get a little heat earlier. If it gets too wet, that's going to dry out faster. Or, you know, we can do some equidistant or broadcast planting. This is usually done on a bed where we put these seeds in very meticulously so that they're planted alternately. And we think about that with things like onions, maybe beets. They're just not thrown in there. They're done quite scientifically. So you can do it. But what I usually tell people is, you know, if you're in the garden, you got to pick a system that fits your machinery. Whether you have a 2-row cultivator or a little rototiller, what really fits as you look at doing this here, and it fits you. There's no real right or wrong answers to a lot of these things, but it has to kind of fit your system. So, so direct seeding here, prefer a furrow with uniform depth, and evenly distribute the seed. And most seeds will give you the distance apart that they need to be. There is a lot of variance on that. And I usually tell people if you're on a little heavier soil, you can go quite a bit closer. But the population of the seed has a lot to do with things. First of all, one of the biggest things is maturity. The closer a seed is to its neighbor, the more it's going to actually slow down, you know, the maturity here. And, you know, as I thought about this slide here, you know, things have kind of changed here. And maybe for the home gardener, you know, we say firm the soil over the furrow after planting, water lightly but surely. And that may work real well if you're planting real shallow crops like lettuce and that type of thing. But if we look at the soil moisture out there in this part of the country all the way across to Duluth, it's pretty poor right now. There's not much subsoil. There's a chance we could end up with a pretty dry spring, but there's also a chance we could get flooded out. But anyway, but what we usually do now is we recommend you go ahead and you plant the seed and you put water right over the seed. By doing that, the seed gets soaked, the water right around the seed gets soaked, and it's ready to go ahead and germinate, and then you actually cover the little furrow up. So the seed actually gets drenched with water for a very short amount of time, whether it's a minute or two. And that's the only water that you really need to do when the seed is young. We don't care what the water level is in the middle of the row or to the side of the seed. As long as that water will stretch out to about, it'll automatically stretch out to about a half an inch to an inch around the seed. And that's all it's going to take to get that seed germinated. Now, if it stays dry after it comes up, then that's another story. You're going to have to continue on and, irrigate or give them water somehow. So watering that seed down is really important. Is there any questions here on direct seeding?
We have one in Bagley.
Okay.
Terry, what about soaking like peas in water overnight before you plant them or other seeds?
Yeah, that works pretty good, Al. It's just that it takes, you can't run them through a machine that way.
Right.
So you have to go ahead and plant them. But, and the people do that with corn and with other things too, as long as you're going to plant them by hand, works well.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Thanks.
Hey Terry, this is Jake in Winona. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the temperature, what depth and how do you check it? Do you actually get out there with a thermometer?
Okay. Yeah, you're right. They have soil thermometers. I actually stole the one from my wife's stove that I use because it's the same. Yeah, they have them where you poke them in the turkey and tell you, it's the same thing. But actually, you can buy them for $5 or $6, and they're on about a 6-inch probe with a dial on there that'll give you the temperature. And usually, we usually like to look at the soil temperature about an inch, at least an inch deeper than we're going to plant the seed. So that's going to give it's going to hold a little bit of soil temperature at night, and then the roots will germinate into some warmer soil. So at least that. And for warm season crops, sometimes we say, up to 2 inches. So that's a very good question. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on here. Transplanting. And I always call this the key to success in northern Minnesota. And we really need that extra growing season. So we asked the question, what can be transplanted? And it's a lot more than people realize. On our farm, we transplant our first string beans, our first sweet corn, our first beets, all our cole crops, which are broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, that type of thing. All the vine crops, we transplant. We don't seed any of our vine crops anymore. Of course, tomatoes and peppers definitely should be transplanted here, and much more. So there's a lot of possibilities out there that people don't really realize, especially when it comes to the warmer season crops. To get your crop about 2 weeks earlier, that's especially important if you're moving into a farmer's market, but even if you're growing for yourself, there's nothing more tasty than green beans a couple of weeks earlier. So, what are some of the main reasons we transplant? We want to ensure the most efficient use of space. And when you direct seed, we do realize that a lot of times your germination is going to be down to 50%, even if you use good seed. It may turn cooler on you. Some insects may have gotten in there. There can be some other problems. And where you have a skip, you don't have a plant. So you don't really have an efficient production row, or as efficient as it could be. When you transplant, I'm sure transplants can die, but that's not the common thing here. So efficient use of space, it improves uniformity. It enables the growing of long season vegetables. We've been very fortunate. For the last 20 years, we've never lost a pumpkin or squash crop, and it's basically because we went to transplanting. We usually put in our transplants, and actually we put them in on plastic, and we're going to talk about that. And we never transplant till the soil temperature is 65 degrees. Does anybody want to guess, at least in northern Minnesota, what day of what month the soil temperature hits 65 degrees? if you took an average of 10 years? June 10th, you hit it right on. Yep. Well, June 10th. And if you look at all agricultural data, that's probably going to tell you a June 10th at 3 to 4 inches. So it enables the growing of long season vegetables where we can plant 100 or 110-day pumpkins because we've actually transplanted it. We have that growth here. And for some crops that germinate really hard, I think of asparagus, I think of peppers, especially the hotter the pepper is, especially if you get into them that are, 800, or 7 or 8, almost a million Scottsville units, the germination is very, very slow on them. And you can never germinate them outside. So for slow germinating vegetables, they work ideal here. And we can overcome other problems too. So another thing, it really improves competitiveness with weeds, because you can go out there and rototill or harrow just before you transplant, and you've got that flush of weeds. And weeds are a science in themselves. But there are certain times of the year, especially early in the season, that a lot of our key weeds like pigweed, lamb's quarters, and some of the others germinate. And if you can get them tilled in before you transplant, you probably got 80% of your weeds controlled for the summertime. Not that you're not going to have a few come up, but it is important here. And it gives us better control in scheduling your harvest. You can go ahead and do 3 or 4 transplanting if you're in farmer's market and you want to sell something over a long period of time or something like that. And
Terry? Terry, can we ask a question?
Sure.
What is vernalization?
That's the ability
Overcomes.
It's the ability of the plant to soak up water to all the parts. Well, it's just the way that plants can absorb water, or not plants, but seeds, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Can
okay.
absorb water.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, Terry, in Moorhead, when you measure temperature, I think it'd be good to know when you do that in the day.
That's a very good point, right. And usually the time of day that we usually use is about 10 o'clock in the morning. But it's good to do it consistently. Good point. Let's go. Anybody else?
I would just add, with the transplanting, in addition to the advantages that you have is, especially for those that are market gardening, if you're the first one with whatever it is, that's a big deal at a farmer's market. So that's just another advantage to transplanting.
Great. We appreciate that. Any other comments? Okay. So we always have some cautions with everything we do. So we want to avoid transplant shock and harden these plants off. Now that doesn't mean you have to leave them out in the trays for 3 or 4 weeks. But usually a week or something of putting them outside, at least during the day, will harden them off. There's several reasons for that, and if you have them in the greenhouse, they're watered continually, they transpire so much easier, and we need to, basically we're teaching the plants to make better utilization of water and just kind of get used to some temperature shocks. And if you can transplant in the evening or a hot day, that may not always be possible, but that really helps us things along. And know which crops do not transplant well. And like I say, most of them actually do now. I think the touchiest ones you really have to worry about are the vine crops. And they transplant well as long as you take all the dirt with them. You cannot expose the roots on vine crops and transplant them like you can tomatoes or peppers, because they will just, instantaneously die on you. So you want to pick a cell size that will, accommodate that. And then if you can avoid extra wind, if you're getting a terrible windy day, you probably don't want to go out and transplant on that here. And some transplants are tough. I think of cabbage and I think of broccoli, really tough. They're hard to make mistakes with some of them. But again, you get into the vine crops and you run into some real serious problems here with improper transplanting or especially hardening off. Ooh. Most annuals are 3 to 4 weeks old. Actually, I like them to push them, and we should, go ahead and talk a little bit about that here. If we're using cucumbers, vine crops, usually about 4 weeks is where we want to plant. They can get root bound very, very hurt, So actually, if we're going to plant June 10th outside, something in there, we'll start our transplants from seed for the vine crops about May 10th, May 15th. Well, that's kind of nice because most times once they're germinated, you can pull them out in a day and actually grow them outside then too, I mean, you're going to get the cool nights. You have to bring a few in. But so it's not as hard to transplant some of these crops. We think of weeks and weeks in the greenhouse, and that's not always the case here. So, but you get into some of your crops like broccoli, 4 weeks is usually enough. The key is you want enough soil in that, around the roots, or enough soil in that cell to be able to handle the root mass. Transplants should be stocky and not spindly or leggy. And we know what makes them spindly or leggy is a combination of not enough light and too much heat when they're germinating. So just kind of keep that in mind. And of course, they want to be free from any type of disease, especially tomatoes and peppers, well-developed root system and not root bound. If you have people that's working in your greenhouses that have a tendency to smoke, they should go in there that are with clean clothes, possibly some type of plastic gloves. The tobacco commits a lot of diseases, especially tobacco mosaic, which the solanaceae pick up. And once you get that in the soil, then you got a long-term 10-year problem to deal with. So then we just dig a hole just large enough to accommodate the roots or plant slightly deeper. Make sure that, at this particular point, you go ahead and water them or slightly thereafter. Now, one thing you want to be careful of, if you're using these here compost pots that are made out of compost, you want to make sure you completely bury them, because if you leave them up above the soil, part of them like a ½ an inch or ¼ of an inch, they'll actually wick the moisture right out of the plants in the soil, and the plants can actually die of dehydration. So just try, if you're using them, bury them. Not a lot of people do anymore, but just something to keep on here. Perennials here, asparagus, that type of thing. Beware of mail order catalogs that sell varieties that do not do well in Minnesota. I see that I work with the Department of Agriculture, and there's a law that's probably going to be passed that if a perennial is non-hardy in Minnesota, it's got to be labeled that way. I wouldn't have wrote the law that way, but that's the way it is. Do some homework to familiar yourself with the diseases and insect problems of the crop. And we're just talking about asparagus here. We can get on to that later here. They're usually planted as 1 to 2 year old crowns. Okay, I'm going to skip that slide here, and we're going to go on. So, well, now we have this garden planted, or our field planted. Is there any questions here till we go on a little bit? Okay, the garden is planted, but we don't want to forget about it here. We need to water thoroughly, and water is the most essential to plant growth. And you can monitor with a rain gauge, and I didn't have this on here, but if you really want to do a good job with watering, you can buy what they call a tensiometer, which they vary in price from 10 to, well, hundreds of dollars, but $40, $50 will buy a very, very accurate one. And they actually will go down about 6 to 8 inches. And they're kind of unique because you put them by a plant. Once you put it in for the season, you want to leave it in that field for the season unless you tear out the crop. So you put it in by a tomato plant root or whatever you're doing. And as the plant extracts moisture, it actually creates a vacuum in the soil. It's not a vacuum like a vacuum cleaner goes, but it creates a vacuum, and the vacuum is measured in what we call centibars. And what these tensiometers do is they measure the amount of centibars, which is comparable to the dryness in the soil. And just to give you an idea, they'll have a dial on there, and when the tensiometer reads like 0 to 10, that means it has about as much moisture in the soil as it can hold. As the plant starts extracting water, it starts going up. When it starts getting to about 30 to 40, especially in that 30-35 range, that means you got to think about something to do about water. And we're going to talk here quite a bit about irrigation, but at that particular point, when it gets to about 70, your plant is probably wilting. If it gets to 100 or 90, the chance of your plant pulling out of that is pretty close to 0. So, think of a plant as, maybe one of your little children, us who garden a lot and baby, if you had a little child on a Friday afternoon that said, "Mommy, I sure am thirsty," and you said, "We'll get you some water on Monday when I have time," it wouldn't go over too well. But the plant's the same thing. It goes into a fact of being stunted. Go ahead.
What was the name of that instrument?
Called a tensiometer.
How do you spell it?
Oh, right off the top of my head, that's a good question without looking at it. It's T-E-N, is it S-I-O-M-E-T-O-R, or something close to that. And in your handouts, there's a one-sheet page that's a supplier sheet. I think it's the sheet just before we started with this lecture right now. And that is a supplier of a lot of commercial products. Nolt's, there's one on there, I think it says Nolt's produce supplies. They're probably one of the better ones that handle tensiometers and a lot of these different products here. You can get them from Johnny's and all that, but beware of the type that you just stick in the soil and read, because you're going to want something there that measures that plant root as it takes water off and puts it back on.
There's some that you put in and take out just to.
Yeah, but they're not extreme, not as accurate. Yeah.
You want to put one in and leave it there.
Right. Any other questions? If you really want to get fancy, you can buy what they call watermark sensors, where you have a computer and you have long cables that go out, and you can do it in 5 or 6 places of the field, and it'll automatically record every 15 minutes what the centibars are. They're only about $1,500, but they're very accurate. I don't think most people need anything like that unless you may be dealing with a center pivot or something. But there is, I guess the point is, there's inexpensive, instrumentation out there. So we look at this next slide, the critical watering time for some vegetable crops. Asparagus, spear, and fern growth, which means all the time. Broccoli and cabbage at head development. Cauliflower at head development. Beans and peas at pod filling. Carrots at emergence and growth. And sweet corn, the minute that ear seems to start tasseling, and cucumbers at flowering, and everything. And just out to Cornell here and did some lecturing here, but I got to talk to some really interesting people who are studying plant physiology of when do the plants have their yield made? When do the plants know, if I can use that terminology, how much they're going to be able to make and how much yield? And the bottom line here, just to give a simple answer to that, is when most plants go into flowering and have a very small fruit like a tomato, the yield and everything is pretty well set for the year. Now you can change that by not watering or something, but the maximum is set for the year at that particular point. At that point, the plant has sent out all kinds of feeler roots. It just has this magic computer that says, this is what I can do. I can't do any more under these conditions. And usually at that point, it's too late to change the conditions drastically. So, you know, taking care of your vegetables in the early life cycle up until the time they start reproducing is extremely important. Intensive gardening methods, we can just spend a little bit of time on this here. For those of you that have small spaces, you know, it works really well here. It may maximize your yield per square foot of land. It creates, you know, can create the best plant environment, or, you know, less labor requirements sometimes. And some of the things that we use are raised beds, interplanting, vertical gardening, or relay planting. Raised beds, probably one of the most important things you're going to use in northern Minnesota, where the soil is raised anywhere from 2 to 4 inches. It definitely improves soil drainage if you're on a heavier wet soil. The thing is, it's fast warm up, reduces compaction, and it's easily customized special planting. So, you know, and we haven't mentioned, we'll get into the plastics in a minute. So making a bed, you know, there's mobile and permanent beds. We use permanent beds more around houses and that type of thing than we do in the field. They're usually 3 or 4 foot wide, and we mix the topsoil with composted manure, and we end up with a final height of 8 to 10 inches around the houses, or like 3 to 4 or 5 inches, you know, in the fields. The other thing you got to think about with a bed that's very important is as you move that soil in, you're actually doubling the amount of topsoil that plant in that bed has, because you've taken the topsoil from around the middle and you've raised it 2 to 6 inches. So it has a lot more nutrition. It has just a lot more compost and everything to go ahead and use. Vertical gardening here, you know, that's the use of trellis, net, string, cages, or poles to maximize crop growth. For those of you that are dealing with high tunnels and greenhouses, we use that a lot with a lot of the trellises to take a lot of the plants up here. So we're not going to spend a lot of time with that. I think that's an interplanting here. The growing of 2 or more vegetables in the same space at the same time. You know, there's some key relationships there. The biggest problem that we run into is light, that you need to really worry about here. We're doing a lot of this work in high tunnels right now to try and get 2 crops out of the same particular row. And, you know, it's not easy to do, but, you know, it can be done with using low light, low nutrition crops along with tomatoes and vine crops early in the season. Okay. Relay planting succession planting is very, very simple. You just tear out one crop and plant another one in the space here. Getting to the point that you can follow, you know, one radish crop with another, or a radish crop with you know, even tomatoes or something like that. Some of you who are here for the gardening aspect, growing vegetables in container here, space is limited. You know, they take up very little space. The fruit can bear over a long period of time. And a lot of our hybrids now are getting bred for container type, especially tomatoes and some peppers here. Just a few words of caution. The light exposure on your deck should be 8 to 10 hours of direct sunlight minimum. The biggest problem that we run into is soil nutrition. It takes a lot of nutrition to grow crops like cucumbers and tomatoes. And you're going to have to either have a tremendous amount of soil, or you're going to have to continue to add some type of nutritious product through the season. And even because you're going to be taking out of the same amount of soil probably 10 times the yield with the container gardening that you do in the field. So it will probably take 10 times the nutrition out of the soil during the year. Cold frames here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but they're kind of neat here. You know, it's a very simple anatomy of a cold frame here. It just goes through plastic, the rays stay in there, and it basically heats the soil. There are some key factors. It doesn't require any outside energy. You can use underground heating cables to get things going early. You need to have good air drainage. It protects from winds and provide ventilation if the outside temperatures, get above 45. So not used as much as they used to be, but some people do that here. We're not going to spend time on that. The next topic I really want to move into is row covers. But before I do, is there any questions on anything that I covered up to this time? Okay, we'll go on with row covers here. Probably one of the most intensive research now is going into row covers. Row covers in high tunnels. Row covers, companies are working on all kinds of new designs. It used to be that we used just plastic, and plastic had some problems. Where you can see the picture up on the upper right, these are row covers. Plastic had some problems in that an acre, enough to do an acre of like cucumbers, the plastic could easily weigh 500 to 700 pounds. To do a total acre in some of these row covers, the total acre, if you covered 100% of it, is around 50 pounds. So they're very, very light. Is there much difference between row covers and plastic and generating heat? You would think so, but the research that we've done the last 2 or 3 years show that there really isn't that drastic much of a difference, but they are important. Okay, so they trap solar radiation and soil moisture. You can use these over plastic, on the ground, on beds, or without it. But let me warn you that if you're not using plastic, the weeds like them warm temperatures very, very well. So you're probably going to have to flip this back every so often and hoe it. But okay, they trap solar radiation and soil moisture. They're designed so that the rain will go through them. They're lightweight, and they're, of course, reusable. They ventilate during the day. They hold the heat in at night. And this is one of the key aspects, I think. Now, last year we did considerable trials with cucumbers and watermelon and cantaloupe. And what we basically did is we laid down green plastic for all of them, and half of them we had plastic or row covers on, which we used just a 0.5 row cover, which means that's a ½ ounce per square yard is all it weighs, which is a light one. And as far as maturity is concerned, the melons and cucumbers were about 10 to 14 days earlier. Of course, you have to take them off when they start to blossom because of pollination. Very important. But they will give you considerable frost protection. They're lightweight. You can reuse them for many, many years. But and a lot of people actually use them against insects. But it always seems to me that there's always some little hole or something in there, and them insects get in there anyway. There's two types. They're really the same row cover. It's how you really use them. We have what we call the supported ones, which are on your left, which actually go over the plants the minute they're put in the ground with some hoops. And all the hoops are is inexpensive number 9 wire that you can just buy at the hardware store, and you can buy a big roll of it and just cut it and just kind of bend it as you're putting it on there. So, it's not any really fancy hoops that you need here. I think the biggest advantage, one of the biggest advantage of supported row covers is wind protection when them specialty transplants are out there. The melons, the cucumbers, the peppers, the wind comes across our prairie and just beats them to death. And if you can protect them until they have a lot of growth and you have to take that off, you can probably make it a lot longer. So then you have the floating row covers. And basically all this is that the row cover goes over the crop and it lays there. This works really well with sweet corn. We have some precautions here. This is just a few shots I took of some row covers here. Of course, these plants were very, very small when they were put in. This is just a shot of our Grand Rapids experiment station where we were using row covers for winter protection on strawberries and comparing the data with straw. How you're going to use these row covers are very, very crop dependent. If the growing point of the crop, like sweet corn, is inside the leaves so the row cover can't touch it, you can lay it on top. But if the growing point, like a tomato or pepper, stick out, you got to go with the ones that are hooped, so the row cover does not touch the plant. Otherwise, it will just stun it really bad. So, you know, it works nice. We've done some research with up to an acre of sweet corn that we transplanted, and we just laid the row cover over it until the corn started to tassel, and it kept just coming up and coming up and coming up. And the minute it started to shoot tassel, of course, we had to take it off. And it's kind of really nice. They just kind of wave in the wind, looks like American flag just waving out there all day long. The stalks get really thick from that. But it does give you a tremendous amount of earliness at a very inexpensive way to do it. The flip side of that is in the fall, you can lay that out there and you can pick up depends on the row cover, anywhere from 4 to 9 degrees with row covers in the fall to give you some protection to get through that one hard frost, and then we usually get the 3 weeks of nice weather. Any question on row covers? Okay, we'll move on to mulches. Mulches have been used for years and years and years. They're basically used to increase soil temperature and provide weed control in agriculture. And in the northern U.S., black plastic is definitely the predominant material. Actually, clear plastic is much superior with soil warming capabilities, and it's drastic. But you have to be able to control the weeds under that plastic, and that means you have to use herbicides, and most herbicides are not labeled to be used under plastic. So, you know, it's just kind of really don't work. But paper mulches are starting to come in, and our research shown that they do a beautiful job of weed control, but not that much with gathering heat. Here's this shot of us laying our plastic mulch by hand at Staples here at one of our gardens out there. And you can see you don't need a big tractor and a big layer and all that type of stuff here. You can easily just make the mound by hand and just lay the plastic right out. There's two types of plastic. The what we call the retrievable, which is the old-fashioned type, which probably 80% of the production is still in. You put it down, it stays there for the whole year, and then in the fall or the spring you pick it up and you either burn it or take it to your friendly landfill. Hopefully they're in a good mood that day, and you know, you dispose of it that way. In Minnesota overall, we don't have the agriculture industry that uses row covers like California and Florida. But over there, disposal is a major, major problem. They do have some machines that pelletize it that will let you go ahead and you know, burn it. But what industry has actually done now is they went to the degradable ones. You know, the degradable ones, they just lay like the others. They're very, very touchy about laying because they're not quite as strong. But they actually go ahead and they degrade here. And I think the next slide is, there's two basic types. One is photodegradable. And photodegradable has to have light to degrade. So it's unpredictable. You know, it's kind of crop dependent. Sometimes you'll see fields that have some in that they plowed up or rototilled, that there's some out there, but they will decay quick. The new technology is biodegradable, where they actually decay by microbe activity, just like plowing under corn stalks or compost. And you know, the problem with both of them is, if you get a warm, hot summer, they're going to probably degrade before you want them to. But I would say most of the growers are heading that way. Yes.
So with those, do you stake them down?
Oh, no, I should explain how they're laid. They're usually laid, a 4-foot piece of plastic is usually laid 3 foot, and dirt is thrown up along the sides of it. So the dirt holds it tight. And actually, it's nice to take your shovel and dig a little trench to lay that plastic in on the side. Cover it up, yeah. Yeah, if you have a place where it's not covered up, the wind will get under it, and I've seen them tear out just 100-foot rows, just like that. So you need them sealed really tight. No.
So, and then that first picture, I think it was 2 slides back, where you had about 4 feet between each, row, one more back. Yeah. So the part where the dirt is just, that's your walking path, and then you plant
On the plastic. And
just create little holes there.
right in there, yeah. And you know, we get a lot of questions on irrigation, and we're going to get into that. A lot of people use drip tape, but it's not as important as we used to think it is. The water will get through them holes, you know, most years. So, you're still going to have weed problems between the rows, but you can usually get that with the rototiller or cultivator.
What were you planting there?
Here,
Yeah.
this was actually our tomato plots, and right to the right of that is a high tunnel. And we were doing some disease studies to see if when the tomatoes in this plot got infected, if the ones in the high tunnel would get infected. So, any other questions?
Terry, go back to the row covers. Is there any issue with disease moving if you reuse that row cover? Disease issues on there?
We really haven't had any, because usually the row cover is taken off when the plant is really young. I mean, most of the diseases come after that. So that's a good question, but up until, I'm not saying it's impossible, you know. And some of you can buy these row covers in any width. If you're going to use them like shown up here in the upper left-hand corner, we usually buy ones that are around 5 feet wide, and that will give us plenty to go over that hoop. And you know, we also hold them down with some dirt. So I mean, you can buy them in all kinds of different areas, and my recommendation is, even if you're a small producer and you only want a row or two, call up Nolt or Jordan, because you're going to get it for 1/10 of the cost that you can get it for from some of these seed catalog dealers. No seed catalog dealers in the audience, is there? Okay, good questions.
Terry, what would you name those places again where you could get that material?
Probably one of the cheapest ones around that you can just pick it up is Jordan Seeds out of the Twin Cities. They should be on that page just before the PowerPoint that I'm doing now, about the 3rd page in. And also Knowles Produce is another place to get them. And they're very, very light. Like I say, they don't cost much to, and you can get them, about the smallest you can get is 250 foot in a roll, and you can get up to 500. And I would just assume, even on our farm, just buy the 250 footers. They're so much easier to handle, and just keep adding on. And you should be able to buy a 250 by 5 foot for, I'm guessing, $23, something in that range. Any other questions? Okay. Not going to spend a lot of time here on mulches. We get a lot of colors. This is actually a shot taken with Vince Fritz's work down at Waseca with different color mulches. And this is still an infant an infant science of the different colors of mulches. But there are a few very, very common trends with mulches. And the number one common trend is if you use a mulch like a black or a green, your yield will double and your earliness will be 10 days. Now, that is the kind of the rule of thumb that you're going to get. And that doesn't make any difference, at least in northern Minnesota, on any color that you use. I get a lot of questions, should I be putting red plastic mulch on my tomatoes? We've done a lot of research with that at Grand Rapids, and we have found there is some yield advantage, but we can't pinpoint it to 1 year. The trend is we get the yield advantage at the second half of the tomato production plant cycle and not so much at the beginning. Where we've seen a lot of data that has been very positive is Arkansas and Missouri, where they have a long season. So whether it happens up here or not, I think we get a little bit of benefit for it, but I really wouldn't spend the extra money unless you just want to, play around a little bit. Again, this green mulch is quite unique in the fact that we knew we had to have a mulch that gave a lot more heat for some crops than the black. And we know that the white or the clear, was really bad for weed control. So they came up with what they call this green IRT mulch, which if you actually hold it to the sun, you can see through it, but it's shaded enough that the plants will not, but the sun will go through it. So you don't get quite the heat as clear, but really, really close. And usually with a lot of crops, the green will make about a 7-10 day difference earlier, especially melons, than the black. Watermelons, peppers love green, but they do well on black too. You can just notice in this picture how close we have these peppers in. We have them at 18, we have 2 rows on that 3-foot wide bed, and they're 18 inches apart, each row. And of course, they're alternate spaced. So I mean, we've actually got, close to double the amount of plants on that plastic than you would outside. And I'm not going to spend a lot of the mechanism, but I think that there's a lot of future in colored mulches, but I just don't think we've gone far enough yet. This is high tunnels here, kind of the Cadillac of the northern Minnesota garden, and just going to touch on them. I mean, 4 to 8 weeks earlier production in the spring, 2 to 5 weeks later possible production in the fall. We can grow a lot of crops that aren't usually grown in the area. Very, very high production per plant. A lot of times I'm up to 10 times. You can do a crop mix in them, and they're very, very cost effective. And you can usually get by with no pesticides if you got good manage, which leads us to organic production with those that want to do that. This is just a shot here of Dallas Flynn. I'm looking at his early cucumber crop in his high tunnel. The thing I wanted to mention about high tunnels is the NRCS right now has a program for gardeners to purchase high tunnels. And probably a lot of them in this audience have utilized them. But if you're a gardener who is going to farmers markets or CSAs or selling your product, in Minnesota, they will pay up to $2.10 a foot, depending on exactly what class you fall in. It's a little touchy, but up to $2.10 a square foot for a tunnel up to 2,178 feet. They come up with the 2,178 feet because that's 1/5 of an acre. And they will cost share that much. And they don't seem to be that hard to get if you've had some sales at farmers markets the year before or something, or can really show that you're going to get serious into this, even if you've been a grain or a soybean farmer or something like that, and are available. And I was on a national committee that helped design that program, and Minnesota leads the nation right now in high tunnels. Go ahead.
So what's the difference between a high tunnel and a greenhouse?
Okay. The difference between a high tunnel and a greenhouse, froze up here, darn it. High tunnel and a greenhouse uses artificial heaters, artificial ventilation, fans, and usually a double layer of plastic. A high tunnel is a single layer of plastic. It's ventilated by opening up the sides and having gable vents, so there's generation. You're using a plastic on there that has a high solar activity, which can really heat, and it's probably about 10% of the cost. So a greenhouse has the advantage that you can go ahead and run all season long. Of course, then you're getting into lights and other things like that. All year long, yeah. What did I say? All day long? All year long, yeah. Okay. Okay. It's 7:30. I think we're going to stop right now, and hopefully you guys got some cookies or something at your site, being it's Valentine's Day. And really, I'd like everybody at each location to get to know each other. So if you could do a quick introduction and how this material, basically applies to you, and maybe some of the important things that you feel we discussed so far, and then maybe you could come up with some questions. So the time is 7:30, and how long should we break? At 10 minutes. So we'll be back here at roughly 20 minutes to 8. Thank you.
Welcome back, people. Hope you had some good conversation at your sites. Do you have questions for Terry? You'll have to remember to unmute to let us know if you have questions.
Terry, we were talking a little bit about issues with root maggots, and especially if you're going to be organic and maybe not even a high tunnel. Do you have any suggestions?
The root maggots are basically what causes them? There's actually two types. There's the true root maggot, and then there's the one that's actually what we call like the seed corn maggot. And let's start with the seed corn maggot. The fly actually lays its egg right on top of the seed, and it actually burrows into the ground. And what usually attracts that is a lot of green foliage. So if you tilled up a lot of weeds and that type of thing, that's where you really get the maggots from. Because they evidently the green, the senescence of the green actually attracts the flies that lay the maggots. When it comes to maggots, like what I call cold crop maggots, that type of thing that attacks them. There's a couple things you can do. You can use them row covers to keep the flies out. Actually, putting wood ashes around them after they're transplanted helps a lot, and they can't stand the alkalinity of that. So there's a couple things you can do. They're not really a biggest problem as they used to be, but they still can be. Anybody else?
Terry, where do potatoes fall for planting? What temperature would you recommend planting them at?
Actually, we kind of like a 50-degree soil temperature. Under that, they will germinate a little bit about 42, 43 degrees, the seed pieces. But the longer they're in the soil, the more chance they have to pick up, the different diseases. So, and it depends. Like a red potato, most of the reds, like the dark red Norlands, Dakota Rose, they'll take, soil temperatures around 5 or 7 degrees cooler than the russet potatoes will.
What's the reasoning behind that, if there is any?
I guess just the genetic makeup of the plant.
Okay.
The reds are really a cool season plant as compared to the russets. Other questions? Okay. Oh. Okay. We're going to move on here with irrigation systems. And like I mentioned before, irrigation to me is one of the key aspects, whether you're a small gardener or, you know, a bigger commercial grower, a farmer's market person, it's the real key. And we used to think of irrigation, we used to think of a lot of water, a lot of grief, but it really isn't like that now using some of the newer techniques that are out there. So I'm just going to go over some of the sites here. But we look at, you know, in selecting irrigation, we look at crop type. And some of that's efficiency, but like you can use drip on most anything. Plant spacing, planting date, are using plastic mulch, what's your field layout, what's your soils like, what's your water supply. That's a big thing here. And also with some systems, they take a lot of labor to move around. Probably the second most common irrigation source is what we call sprinkler irrigation systems, or what we call solid sets. You can kind of see from the lower slide on the left-hand side that, you know, that's one basically in operation. And basically what there are pipes, aluminum pipes that snap together. They can be moved very easily. They go down the field. The pipes are 30 to 40 feet long on most sizes. They snap together with sprinkler heads. They hook into a main line, and the water is pumped. They give very, very good uniformity. You can actually put some fish emulsions or different fertilizers through them, and they work well. Probably the number one reason that most growers have solid sets is for frost protection of strawberries, blueberries, possibly raspberries, and maybe some other crops. And the way that works is the irrigation system is started up when the weather gets around 35 degrees, and as the temperature drops, the water freezes around the blossoms, and as it freezes, if you remember your chemistry, water gives off heat. So as long as the irrigation system remains running, the heat is given off, the blossom is protected. And it has to be ran in the morning until all the frost is off. So you can kind of see here, this system is actually still running. It's quite early in the morning. The worst case scenario that I can remember on our farm is it dropped down to 32 degrees at 8 o'clock at night, and we had to run until 11 o'clock the next morning. The berries were in full bloom, dead bloom, had kind of an early spring, and we got caught. And there was so much ice out there when the sun broke at 5 o'clock in the morning, you couldn't see the leaves. And I figured, boy, this crop was gone. And we just kept it running, and 11 o'clock, all the ice was off, shut the system down by night. By later on that night, the plants were perking, and they all had a really good crop. So, and you can do that with a small, little sprinkler hose out in the garden. But the key is for frost control, you have to have the irrigation running just before it freezes, and it's got to continue to run until the ice has been melted off of it. We can go a lot into designing. If you're interested in designing, there's a Midwest Plan Service book that all us 7 colleges got together and made. It's Midwest Plan Service. There's the website, and you can pick them up. I think they're around $20 here. Not going to spend a lot of time on design. There's all kinds of options with these, with nozzle size, pressure, spacing, and layout, and sprinkler heads. So, you can just run one row at a time, and you can buy the pipe and you can keep moving it over if you don't need frost control. Most of us now are starting to use these newer plastic type emitters and nozzles. They're getting to be, they're relatively inexpensive. The new one, brass was the one that they always made out of, and of course brass has just went sky high. Now, water for irrigation is extremely important, especially you look at some of the key states like California and Florida. So anytime we know that we throw water in the air, we're going to have a 30 to 50% evaporation rate before that water hits the ground. So to make it very, very simple, we lose close to 30% minimum of the water that we throw up there with these type of systems before it hits the ground, and that takes a lot of water. So probably the most common system that most people are going to are what we call drip and trickle irrigation options or systems. And with that, let me see, okay, it has a lot of advantages. First of all, they operate under low pressure. You can do a lot of acreage out of a 4-inch garden well. They'll give you actually better water in the root zone than the overhead type systems. They take some labor to lay them out, but so do the other systems. It works well with mulches. I'm putting them under plastic and that type of thing. You can probably get by with somewhere between 5 and 20% of the water for the season using drip tape as you can with going with some type of an overhead type of a system. And here we see some different pictures, and I'll show you a few more. DNR always wants me to put this slide in here. If you use over 10,000 gallons per day, you actually need to apply for a permit, but that's quite a bit of water with drip tape here. So what does it cost? I can back up a little bit. What does it cost for a drip system? Well, of course, a lot of it depends on where you buy it and how you buy it, but if you buy it, a reasonable system, the drip tape will cost you somewhere between 3 and 7 cents a running foot. We usually throw it out at the end of the year, but you don't have to. Okay. You can run it right out of your well. Even if your garden's a long ways away, you can hook up with plastic pipe or PVC pipe or some of the black roll pipe. And the water will come out of the well at somewhere, most houses are 40 to 60 pounds pressure. And so that water, just before it goes into the drip tape lines, will be reduced to approximately 10 pounds. The pressure regulator to do that is around $10, $10 to $15. And technically, that's all you need. We do recommend putting a screen in there. That's another $10 or $15 in case you go ahead and have some sand or something come up your well. That real fine 100 or 150 mesh screen will actually go ahead and pick that out. So I mean, if you're doing an acre or two, you can do it right out of your house well. The nice thing about it is, you're going to probably run it more often instead of just overhead irrigating every 3-4 days. You may run it every other day, but the nice thing about it is you can completely computerize the thing for about $100. They have nice computers that you can kick it on, 4 different zones, 4 different times a day. It'll just kind of do all the recording for you. So it's a very inexpensive way to get water on your plant. If you're growing in high tunnels, it's about the only way to actually do it. Again, I would definitely recommend using one of them sources on there. Another source we didn't recommend was Ag Resources that's on there. They're just right here in Detroit Lakes. They handle all these products here quite reasonably too if you buy some of the bigger quantities. So my advice is that if you're just starting out, I would definitely kind of familiarize myself with drip tape, unless you want to go ahead and spend systems that you already have. Using drip tape is an art, but it doesn't take you long to learn it. Is there any questions anybody has on drip tape? I think that's going to be one of the most important things that you learn tonight is drip tape.
Say, Terry, do you recommend doing a water test prior to getting into a kind of large-scale irrigation?
We usually kind of recommend that. There's two things that we're concerned about with the water. One is pH. If you would have pH that's off the scale, that could really affect production. We don't have too much of that with any of the growers that I deal with. The other is if you have a lot of water with iron in it, you usually don't need to test for that. You can see it all over the house unless you got a filter. The problem with that is it will plug the drip tape. So you may need some type of iron removal filters or something like that. But we always recommend testing it. You know, I can think of experiences where we did research with nitrogen down at Staples here, trying to get different, we were using different nitrogen applications in the high tunnel, and we couldn't get any different results. And I didn't test the water, I admit that, and I finally did. We found out the nitrogen in the water was 25 parts per million, and we're supplying like 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen, which was enough to almost grow the crop. So, you know, freaky things do happen, but that's a very good point.
Terry, this is Bagley. Is there any particular time of day that's better to do like with the drip irrigation?
No, it really doesn't make any difference. A lot of people will do it at night when they're not using their house so well, if they're using a lot. The one thing that drip irrigation is used for, though, that's a very good question, is to cool the plants. So if you get them days where we frequently hit 95 or 100 degrees, you can run it during the middle of the day. The water coming out of the well will be absorbed by the plants and cool them. Good question. But as a rule of thumb, it doesn't make a lot of difference, except in some unique, instances like that.
You talk about using well water. What about city water? Do you not recommend using city water or combine it with like sump pump water?
Actually, city water, even though it has a touch of chlorine in it, it has not had any negative effects. We had our research out here at the Sisters here for, I don't know, 4 years or 5 years, I can't remember. But anyway, and that's all city water, and I was worried about the chlorine, but we could never pick any up. So it must have evaporated, so. Good question, though. Any other questions? Okay. So I just want to, before we get on to the different types of plants and how to really take care of them and some of the concerns, you really want to think about markets if you're here to sell your products. Are you going to start out, or are you using on-farm sales? Kind of a good way to get started here. Farmers markets are really good. To go out there, especially a lot of the markets in the area are still developing and they need vendors. A good way to test your market and your marketing skills. CSA is another way to market products. Becoming more and more popular all the time. And then moving into grocery stores, farm to school. We have some people here who work a lot with farm to school. An excellent way to get into some markets here. And then commercial wholesalers. There's a rule of thumb here. As you follow this down, you look at on-farm sales, farmers markets, and CSAs will definitely return the most amount of dollars for the crop. So at that particular point, you are getting the most amount of the consumer dollar that you possibly can. Then you move into grocery stores, and the rule of thumb is you lose 50% of the market price, and sometimes more, moving into grocery stores. So if you could sell something for $1 a piece, whatever that would be, a head of cabbage or whatever, in a grocery store you're probably going to get 50, 60 cents for it, and sometimes not even that. The market for farm to school is wide open. We're just trying to really develop that. It's a pretty good market right now as far as payment, but we do have to sometimes compete with some of the products that come in from overseas and that. And then you move into the commercial wholesalers, and that would be like Rainbow or that, where it goes into a warehouse, you can probably figure you're going to lose 75 to 85% of the value of you would at farmers markets. So if you're going to move into commercial wholesalers, you have to be on a very, very big scale, a very efficient scale, almost sell close to semi-load lots, and be able to move it on a continuous supply. So, as you kind of look at your future plans, you kind of really want to really think about that. So, thinking about markets, take a look around and see what's available. What's out there? Do you have a local farmers markets? Can you sell off your farm? How much do you really want to sell? We have a lot of room in this local food movement for all kinds of products, and I know tonight we're talking about vegetables, but we have meats and breads and other things here, honey. That's really important to the local food movement. And some of these markets are still wide open. There's a lot of people who are just learning about the health aspects of local foods and chemical-free products and chemical-free foods and that type of thing. And on the other hand, some markets can be pretty competitive too, so you really want to kind of watch. I would say the real competitiveness is in the wholesale markets and some of the grocery markets. I would not get into a wholesale market unless you were in it a long time, you know what you could produce, and you had a lot of expertise behind you. And it usually takes a big capital outlay for the commercial markets, just basically because you have to have a lot of acreage and that type of thing, unless you're in something very specialty. So, Bagley?
Terry, I also want to just say that I'm working with county fairs and the state fair a lot, and I know several people that exhibit enough vegetables to pay for their seeds for their family. So that's kind of a sustainable thing to look at as well, plus it encourages exhibitors at county fairs. So I like to share that thought with people as well.
Yeah, we appreciate that, Al. That's some good thought. Any other
Okay,
questions?
we have one more question. Go ahead.
Whenever you start a business, you check out the market, and you can usually find some place that gives you a source of percentages of demand. And is there anything like that available for any of the things we might be trying to sell?
We basically headed out by Linda. We have done some consumption data possibilities of what was needed in our northwest and north central Minnesota. I think that was done product by product pretty well, wasn't it, Linda? Pretty well. Anyway, that is available. A lot of it we have to look at products that maybe aren't out there in sufficient supply. Now, the flip side is when you get into the big commercial markets, yes, we have data that comes in every single day. I can tell you how much product was shipped into Chicago of tomatoes or cucumbers. I can tell you how much was shipped to San Francisco. I can tell you what the prices were yesterday. But we don't have anything like that locally at all.
Brian might talk about his calculator.
Where can we get that information, Terry? Oh, somebody else is talking.
Okay, I'm going to ask, Ryan, are you there? Ryan Pash? Okay, I guess he must have stepped out. He'd be in Fergus, right?
Yeah, I'm here in Fergus. I had to unmute myself, Terry.
Okay. Lynn and I were just talking about the calculator that you kind of came up with.
Yeah, it's on the local food site. So if you go to localfoods.umn.edu, it's called the Food Shed Calculator. Minnesota Food Shed Calculator. If you put in a population and a time of year in this Excel sheet, it'll give you basically the consumption for a whole range of products, vegetables, meats, dairy.
Yeah, very good. And I think part of the whole aspect with this local food movement is we got to all team together and convince the customer that this is important. And we have a lot of people jumping on board. I'm on the State Advisory Committee for Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they're really interested in putting a lot of dollars into farmers markets and health. A lot of other organizations are too. University of Minnesota, the Northwest Regional Sustainable Partnership. So I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions there. But I think we're coming up with a lot more, basically a lot more research all the time on what we can use. We do have a farmer, you want to talk about that, Linda, that farmer's market thing coming up on the 23rd from that class?
On February 23rd, oops, wrong button. On February 23rd, we're hosting a meeting here at the Crookston campus to help farmers markets. Well, let me back up. During fall semester, we worked with the integrated marketing and communications class here on campus to develop a farmers market promotion plan for all the markets in Northwest Minnesota. And we did that sort of in response to some of the needs that we identified in farmers markets with some interviews that were done in spring a year ago. So Rachel Lundbaum is an instructor here at Crookston, and she and her class put together a whole series of recommendations about how to put farmers markets in media, how to do promotions that are more direct, working with a customer, a lot on communications, a lot on raising awareness, a whole series of recommendations. And so on the 23rd of February at 4:30 in the boardroom, which is just down the hall here, Rachel will do that presentation. Sarah Reese from the SHIP program will also talk about how some of the SHIP resources can be used or will be made available to farmers markets to do some of those, to implement some of those ideas that Rachel and her class present. And we'll also take a look from the regional partnership side on how we can support farmers markets kind of in that whole, across the whole region with some marketing messages and promotions. So if you want more information on that, you can contact me, Linda Kingery, by email, kinge002@umn.edu. I'll put a note on the local foods, on the localfoods.umn.edu college page with some information. I think you'll be able to find me. So follow up if you have questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. I think another major thing that we all need to work on developing is the farm to school program. You know, and you have to go in there with the idea that you're going to really help the young people change their eating habits, and hopefully they'll change the parents. You know, the University of Minnesota has developed ways for the schools to work with farmers in the whole community, contact farmers and that type of thing. And, you know, the real key there is to start small with the schools, but some schools are way ahead and some are way behind. And I think that's one thing they all really need to be working on. So thank you very much from Ryan and Linda. Any other questions before we move on to another topic? Okay, what I'm going to do, we have less than an hour left here, and I want to take some of these vegetables and kind of highlight them. You do have a variety selection here. There we go. Sorry about that. We do have a variety selection here in the back. We probably won't get to all that tonight here. Everybody has some variety, but these are ones that we've actually tested that have done very, very well in northern Minnesota. But I'm going to pick out some particular vegetables here, kind of go through them quickly as to some of our concerns. And, you know, the first thing, I don't really have a slide on this here, but people ask me, you know, how would you get into organic production if you were going to really, really seriously do it? And of course, you know, most people know the basics. You have to be, you know, 3 years on the soil without chemicals that are manufactured in a lab and soils and fertilizers that aren't approved and that type of thing. But as far as vegetables is concerned, you know, especially if you're learning, look at the vegetables that our insects and diseases don't bother up here. You know, I mean, I look at asparagus as one, and some people don't like that, but I look at, you know, at string beans, you know, and we can go on. We have, you know, onions aren't bothered very much. And make a list of all these vegetables, and then you get into some of them like potatoes. And because we grow so many acres up here, your chance of having to use some pretty strong products, at least if you're going to grow russets, you know, get to be, you know, pretty probable. So, I mean, it's kind of an easy situation. Sometimes I like to teach a class on organics up here and how to really get into it and work your way through it. But that's not the purpose of this here. But asparagus here, you know, asparagus is a perennial crop. You can plant it through either transplants, 1 year old here, and it can produce for 15 years or longer. It's nice to have a row out in the garden here. What does it need? It needs good drainage and full sun. You know, we dig a trench 12 to 18 wide and the rows 4 to 5 foot apart. And again, it's a high fertility crop here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this here, but I am going to spend a lot of time with some of the insects and diseases with these crops that you really need to worry about here. And the truth of the matter is, in Minnesota, at least the northern half, we don't have to worry about these. The asparagus aphid, even though I've seen them up here, have never been in a situation where they have damaged. A few asparagus beetles from time to time, but nothing too serious here. One of the biggest worries that we have up here, if you plant them crowns too shallow, you can get winter kill. So we try to keep the crowns planted at least 8 to 9 inches deep up here to just protect against the winter here. Moving into beans here, bush snap beans is the most common garden vegetable. If you're growing something organically, this is a one that you can easily do here. We don't have a lot of you know, insects that you know, that really go after them. A few things you need to worry about with beans is soil crusting and keeping the pods off the surface. What are some of the diseases that we have here? Luckily, we don't have most of these in northern Minnesota. White mold, the only way you can get that is really touching the soil. Brown spot, rhizoc, fusarium, and physium are all soil diseases. And the only way that you can, I shouldn't say the only way, but the most logical way that you can get them is just planting in cold soils. The seed stays in the ground. These diseases are in the ground all the time, if you like it or not. So the idea is to get that seed in the ground when it's warm, or transplant them, and get them beans moving here, and they'll outgrow them. Cold crops here, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, they're cool season crops. I think we can grow these more economically up here than almost any place in the United States here, except some of our mountain regions. So what do we really need? Cold crops require a tremendous amount of nitrogen. So that means you either need some additional fertilizer, organic matter, or something like that here. And the one thing they are very sensitive to, especially broccoli and cauliflower, is soil moisture fluctuations. So try to keep you know, the soil watered and that type of thing here. Broccoli here, growing and harvesting, the use of transplants is the best, but they do very well up here. One of the only parts of the United States, except the mountainous regions, that you can direct seed and still get a very good crop. So what we do is we put in 1 or 2 plantings using transplants, and we direct seed early in the year, and we do the last September and October plantings from seed. Again, just some common sense here. It's possible to get too much heat. That does happen in a few years, but the heat is only critical when the head is forming. They can take unbelievable amounts of heat when they're coming out of the ground and up until the time the head forms. Cabbage, we are kind of in the cabbage mecca of the United States. You know, just unbelievable we can do up here. We still do use a lot of transplants here, basically because it's a lot easier to control the weeds put in the middle a bit earlier. Lots of varieties there. Cauliflower is probably one of the tougher ones to grow. That has to be established through the use of transplants. And again, once the curd formation has begun, you need to think about blanching. And they used to actually go ahead and tie a rubber band around the leaves to blanch the head. We actually don't do that anymore. We just break off some of the bigger leaves and set it over the head, and that's, you know, gives us enough cover. Most of the newer varieties are self-blanching. We still have to watch it a little bit. What are the problems with that? Clubroot. I'm not saying it's not found in Minnesota, but I've never seen it in the northern half of Minnesota. Downy mildew, not serious up here. In yellows, root disease, most of the plants up here don't have them, so we're lucky with that. Alternaria spot on leaves here, usually not a serious problem in northern Minnesota here. And again, the same with the root diseases here. Where we have the problems is imported cabbage worm and cabbage looper. Both are usually blown in. One of the tricks to get away from that, if you're using organic or semi-chemical free products, is to go ahead and plant late in the season. So you're actually planting here the end of June, 1st of July, and after that the cabbage worms and all that it's too cold, or they've gone bye-bye, so to speak, and so you don't have to worry about the fall. If you're going to plant the spring crop of these things, it can be very, very tough, and you're probably going to have to use some products, like Dipel or Keep On It to use it. Here's where some of your row covers can come in handy to go ahead and keep that down. Aphids up here, we usually have enough natural enemies, especially if you grow a lot of flowers around, that will survive it, and it's not really a much of a problem. Any questions so far? Okay.
Terry, hang on a second.
When did he plant his broccoli by seed for fall?
Terry, when did you plant your broccoli by seed for fall harvest?
We usually do one planting when the temperature will get about 50 degrees, and then we usually do the last planting here usually almost latter part of June, and that will put it into early October. Broccoli is relatively short-lived. Most varieties about 65 to 75 days from direct seeding, that time of year. Other questions? Okay, let's move on and talk a little bit about sweet corn. Sweet corn gets very, very unique in the fact that we actually have 3 genetic types of sweet corn out there. And some of them require isolation from other sweet corns, and we can do that by spacing or planting at different times of the year, and we'll talk about that. And some of the newer varieties, called either the super sweet or the modified super sweet or the augmented super sweet, just will not do well until you get some 65-degree soil temperature. Isolation is required. If you're planting a super sweet or modified super sweet, you need to have them isolated. And again, you can do that by distance, but it takes a lot of distance. So the best way to do that, I feel, is to plant different varieties that pollinate. It's only critical during the first 10 days of pollination. Outside of that, it doesn't really affect anything. And what really happens if a super sweet crosses with the old-fashioned varieties, they'll be tougher and the starch will be a lot higher. I think I'll talk a little bit about that here a little bit later here. I guess I did here. Maintain at least 250 foot, and that's awful hard to do. So otherwise you can just go ahead and take care of it. Okay. I think I have some more slides on that a little bit later. But most of our sweet corns here, corn borer is not that big a problem, but corn earworm is. And you'll see what that critter looks like on the bottom left slide. And the life cycle of the earworm is very important to understand to basically control it. The only time the sweet corn is really damaged by corn earworm is during the first roughly 15 days, 10 to 15 days of silking. That's when the corn earworm adult, mostly flies up from the south, will land on the green or white silk and lay its eggs. The eggs hatch, they go into the silk and down to the corn, and of course they grow very, very quickly. So, how do we control that? Well, there are several ways. Large-scale producers, there's different products that we can spray, but the spray time is extremely critical, from 5 days after the corn silks for about 10 days. That'll give you about 15 days. Then it'll take about, the minute the silks start to turn brown, the corn earworm can lay its eggs on there, but they'll die. So it's just a critical time why that silk is green and lush that you need to worry about it. So there are organic sprays like Pygonin that you can use, which is very, very pricey. There's tons of sprays. They're not hard to kill. So what are some of the other ways you can do it? You can go ahead and soon as you see the first brown on the silk, you go through and you cut the silks off. That's labor intensive, but it will take care of the earworm before they get into the ear. Another way that you can do it, they have some injection machines that you can buy from Johnny's where you actually inject a mineral oil into the silks when they start silking, and of course the oil it won't really kill it. Well, it kind of will kill it, but anyway, the bottom line is they won't make it to the ear. Covering them up doesn't really work because you need the pollination from the silks. Blackboards and raccoons, hate them raccoons. Common smut and common rust isn't that much of a problem unless you're planting some heirlooms. That just kind of don't happen. So, any questions on sweet corn? Okay. Tomatoes. Tomatoes are probably the most popular vegetable in the garden, and each plant can easily yield up to 15 pounds. And the types and sizes are endless. They can be either determinate or indeterminate. They're great for container gardening. They're self-pollinated, which means that they don't need bees if you have them inside the house. Not that bees don't help. And spontaneous mutations have produced just a variety of beautiful colors. And all them colors, by the way, are some type of mutations. Established planting using transplants. It's a must in this part of the country. Avoid using spiny plants. And you want your plants hardened off, especially with tomatoes here. The one thing with planting tomatoes that are different is you can plant the tomatoes as deep as the bottom leaf, and it will root at the nodes. A lot of people do that to make healthier plants. The negative aspect of that, if you go that deep, you're probably going to be in cold soils. So you need to also take a soil thermometer and see what the temperature is if you're going to go that deep. Our habits are, you can space them or trellis them, plants 24 foot in the rows. The 3 foot, I wouldn't go any closer than 24 inches. Pruning is a real key. We're going to talk about that. Cages work well. Ventilation is important. You got to remember that tomatoes are a solanaceae crop, which is a sister to potatoes, which can cause a lot of problems with blight diseases. What do we get for tomatoes? Kind of another good organic crop, unless we get some leaf diseases in there, the early blights, but there's plenty of copper sprays to use for that. Bacteria, Fusarium lot, bacteria speck, usually not much of a problem in this part of the country here, unless you get some hail with bacteria speck. Tomato mosaic virus, you can always tell if you got that because you walk the rows and they're stunted. Again, that comes, usually it's a virus, so it affects every single cell in the plant. Usually just take them out and get rid of them. What do we have for diseases? Not a lot up here. Aphids usually don't bother us. Whiteflies can be a problem in high tunnels and greenhouses. Colorado potato beetles at times can be a problem. Flea beetles. Tomato hornworms, I've seen them some years, but it's usually not too serious here. So what do we look at here? Blossom end rot, a calcium deficiency. Not that the soil is deficient in calcium, but it doesn't have enough water to carry it up. Sun skulls, you want to keep them away from walnut trees if you have that problem. I thought I had a slide in here on pruning these, and I don't. So I'm going to just talk about it here. Pruning tomatoes in northern Minnesota is a real, I think, a must, and it's not really that hard to do. To make it very, very simple, what you do is wait till the tomato plant starts to blossom and the first tomato is the size of a nickel or a quarter. And then you skip one branch and you take all the branches out all the way down. This will do a couple things. First of all, it's going to give you more airflow. It's going to push the maturity up about 5 to 10 days. And it's just going to make a lot nicer overall tomatoes. If you miss that date and you got to wait till tomatoes are, so big, I don't know if you're going to really stunt them at that particular point. So it's best to try to do it, at a timely basis, and get them bottom leaves out of there. Any other questions on the initial prune?
Terry, on the pruning tomatoes, if you're not as concerned about being early, but you're going for maximum yield, would you still prune them?
That's a pretty good question here. When you don't prune them, a lot of it depends on the variety. You just get a lot of extra foliage and growth, and you lose the bottom set of tomatoes a lot of times. So, it's kind of up to you, but, the overall yield won't be that much different because you're going to be picking up some tomatoes which are going to be quite a bit bigger where you prune them. I guess it's kind of up to you, but any other questions on pruning? It kind of gets to be a 1-hour class on pruning tomatoes, but I just kind of want to mention a few things here because I get a lot of calls with people who have so much growth on their tomatoes and they can't get them ripe and they get frustrated.
Terry, just to clarify what you said, you don't think it hurts the overall yield if you prune as you suggested?
No, the tomatoes will be a little bit bigger. Okay. And we have a lot of data in Grand Rapids to substantiate that.
Yeah. Okay. So whether you're going for early or for maximum yield, either way, pruning will help you out.
Right. And I think the other thing with pruning too is usually in northern Minnesota the yield is higher because you can get a higher percentage of ripe ones.
Yeah. Which I prefer.
Yes.
So Terry, just to clarify, when you say pruning them, so you say take the lower leaves off, and that
Well, that's the first prune for most determinant tomatoes.
When they're the size of a nickel, green.
The first ones, nickel to a quarter.
Okay.
Now skip a branch and then take them on out. And you'll see a lot of little suckers.
Just the leaves.
Well, the branches.
Oh, okay.
Cut them right back to the stem.
That's just determined.
You're going to do it to both. With the indeterminate tomatoes, if you're growing them in high tunnels or you're going up with them with stakes, then you want to do what we call sucker prune. And the tomatoes will, first of all, a tomato only needs about 40% of its potential leaves to make the crop. So you can butcher it pretty bad and still come out okay. But with determinants, they're only going to get 3 foot high, something like that, and that's going to be the end of them anyway. So you don't need to do any farther pruning. With the indeterminants, if you want to go up and stake, what will happen is every time there's a true leaf, there'll be a sucker that shoots out. And that sucker can actually form another stem in a whole nother plant, even though it's feeding off the same root system. So what we tell people then, in this part of the country, is just keep clipping them suckers out as the plant grows and run it as a one stem plant. But again, that's only with the indeterminants. If you do that with the determinants, you're going to really cut your yield pretty bad. So is that clear to everybody? Okay. We're going to move on with potatoes here. And again, lots of varieties out there. A lot of these specialty potatoes, like Yukon Golds, Michigan Purples are coming back. Do they taste better? Well, I think maybe the jury's out, but a lot of people, including myself, really like that Yukon Gold here. So, you know, you can grow for either a new crop or for full season storage crop. The nice thing about them, they're vegetarily grown. A lot of people, you know, look at the blossoms and they'll form what looks like little tomatoes on top. And every year I get lots of calls. Oh, my potato plant has got all these neat tomatoes growing on top. Well, actually what that is the potato seed head. And if you cut it open, there's a lot of little potato seeds in there that probably won't ever mount anything because you're just not in a growing condition. But the plant breeders use that where they actually will cross one variety with another, but you got to do it during blossom time. And again, the good thing about tomatoes is they are true to type. They're vegetatively grown, which means that as they produce more potatoes, each potato is genetically the same. Some keys here. We established planting with seed pieces. And in Minnesota, the seed pieces need to be a minimum of 2 ounces just to take our cool temperatures and get good growth. We recommend using only certified seed unless you use your own seed and you know it's disease-free. Very important here. They should be firm and not yet sprouted and have at least 1 eye when you cut them up. You plant in furrows, cut side down, you know, and you don't go really deep. I see a lot of people plant 8 or 9 inches deep, and really, you know, we kind of recommend going 3, 4 inches deep, 5 at the most here. And what we're actually doing is when the potato starts coming up, we start hilling, and we're actually growing the potatoes in that hill. So when you run a digger down there, you're only going about that deep. I've seen people put tomatoes down or potatoes down there 8, 10 inches, you know, and eventually they'll come up. But somebody's got to dig them things too, you know. And if you're planting with a machine, you're not going to be able to put all the sides down, and somehow they seem to compensate for it. Part of it is a disease situation. If the cut side is down, it just doesn't seem to pick up the diseases from the rains and that type of thing here. So we build the soil around the plants as you cultivate. One question I get, here's a good picture here of how they're hilled here. One question I get, if the plants come up and they're just poking through, can I cover them up? And you can. You just cover them right up, they'll just shoot right out again the next day. So as long as they just got that one single stem. When to harvest, that's a big question here. It depends on your market. Seems like the big market in potatoes right now are the reds that are what we call B-size. That'd be 1 inch to 1.5 inches. Otherwise, you know, you can keep them right on growing here. So the commercial growers, they go ahead and they actually put a vine killer on their plants once the vines start dying off. You know, that's some pretty potent stuff. So you can do the same by just running a lawnmower or a chopper over, getting rid of the vines, and they'll set. Green skin is due to sun exposure. What do we have for potatoes here? A couple things here that can really kind of get to us here. Leaf hoppers, you really need to monitor for them. And what happens is when they cut our hay fields and they cut our wheat fields to the west of us, them leaf hoppers get in the winds and they land on your potatoes, and they, even though they're small, a lot of times I've seen, you know, 1,000 on a tomato plant, and they can take it down. So you can just tell, just kick them, and if they all fly up, you have to use some type of a control on them. And Colorado potato beetles are always a tough one to use. Even the commercial growers are have a lot of problems. They breed so many times during the year that they build up resistance to so many products in a hurry. If it wasn't for some of the systemic products that we have out there, we would be out of the potato business right now. So a lot of these systemic products you can definitely buy in the not in the grocery store, but in the garden centers right now, and they are available. You usually put it down when you plant the seed. Viruses, you can tell them the plants are stunted, and that's what's usually carried by these leaf hoppers and aphids as they blow in, because they carry the disease in their mouth parts, and the minute they bite into the plant is infected. Uh-oh, we're locked up again. Somehow we got locked up here for a minute, folks, so I'll have Linda work on that. So are there any questions on potatoes or anything we covered so far?
Terry, you mentioned the systemic that you're putting down with the seed pieces for potatoes on Colorado potato beetle. Do you know what that is off the top of your head?
Yeah, it's imipropychlor is the brand name, is the chemical name, but it's sold under tomato insect control. I'm trying to think what Bayer sells it at. There's just a whole bunch of them there. Commercially, it's sold under the brand name of Admire or Provato. And I can't remember all the home gardener names, but if you ask for systemic for potato beetle control, and it really works well. I mean, I will say it's been out for several years. Wish I could remember all the names, Howard, but I can't.
And that's going to last season, give you basically season-long control, or?
Yeah, pretty well. It will last 3/4 of the season or more until they're pretty well gone. And if you don't do it, it's best to put it in with the seed, sprinkle it in with water, and I can't remember what it is. I think it's like 1 ounce per 1,000 foot. It doesn't take very much, so you got to dilute it out. And it's just picked up, and it does, like I say, just a superb job. Without that product, we'd probably be out of the potato business. There are some other products, some old organophosphates like thiadan, but we just don't recommend getting into them right now. Oh. Okay. Here we go. Eggplant here. I spend a lot of time with eggplant here. It's kind of a unique crop. It's a warm, very warm season vegetable, but it's self-pollinating, but the fruit does not like to sit in hot temperatures. So to get around that, they have developed several varieties that are what they call cold set eggplant. So if you're buying a variety, try to pick up one that's cold set eggplant here, and you can get a really good crop up here. You know, they kind of like growing peppers and tomatoes. We use roughly the same spacings here. Peppers, I know my wife just planted our peppers for our first high tunnel. I see she put in 70 varieties. That's kind of her thing. I can't even pronounce half of them. But so they're just endless amounts of peppers. They're definitely a warm season crop, and that's the nice thing about tunnels is you can get them. They take about 10 weeks to plant from seed, 10 to 11 weeks to get a transplant really big enough to go outside. So if you're growing them yourself, you really need to think about that.
So Terry, you mentioned some were planted this week. Is the high tunnel that they planted them in seeded?
No, these are actually planted in the greenhouse. I mean, they were seeded, and they'll be put in the greenhouse last week in the high tunnel last week in April.
Okay, so they're in a heated greenhouse.
Right. In this part of the country, we need to use transplants. And again, you get a lot with plastic mulch, with peppers. They do very, very well on plastic mulch here. And, you know, a lot of people like colored peppers. And colored peppers are usually much more expensive in the store. And the reason for that is when you stop harvesting a pepper plant, it stops producing. So if you pick a few green ones, then you let the rest go, you've really cut your yield down drastically. So somehow we have to economically compensate for that. And that's why they'll usually be about 3 times higher price. Plus there's always a risk factor. Here we are, we're looking at melons here. Most melons are monoecious flowering habit. They have to have bees to pollinate. I definitely recommend using transplants. And, you know, you can use 2 to 3 seedings in a cell, cut it down to 1. I would probably say using plastic mulch on melons is probably going to be one of your best returns that you can actually do of all the crops, at least in this part of the country here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on growing and that type of thing. Outside of I did mention that melons, you know, you don't want to put them in there till that soil temperature is at least 60 degrees. What do we have? What problems do we have up here? This critter here on the bottom left, it's the spotted and striped cucumber beetles. And when they come, they either seem to come in groves or you don't have them. And what they do, they don't really do much damage themselves, but they carry a disease called bacterial wilt. And I don't know if any of you have walked out in your garden and all of a sudden there's a dead one here and a dead one here. Probably been infected by one of these here striped beetles coming up.
So at that point, do you remove the whole plant from the garden?
Yes, right away. Good question. Here are just some of the insects here. Like I say, most of these in northern Minnesota we don't have a problem with, but occasionally we do them cucumber beetle. Onions are fun to grow here, but the bulbing is initiated by day length here, third thing down here. Extremely important here. There are 3 types of onions you can get a hold of. Long day onions, intermediate day onions, and short day onions. And what that really means, most of them up here are long day onions, which basically means that they put on most of their growth, most of their leaves during the long growing days, which is up until latter June, and then they start bulbing during the short days. And the more growth you can get, each leaf on an onion will represent 1 ring. So the more growth you can get, the bigger your onion is going to be. They've came up with intermediate day onions like candy. They work extremely well up here. I think they got a little bit of a long day tendency, but if you want to grow onions, it's not a good keeper, but you can buy them plants at several different seed houses here. We usually don't plant onions direct seeded up here unless you're a big commercial grower and you're just looking at the we call the pugnant onions. So recommending is you only want to use long day varieties or intermediate day varieties. When do you know that they're ripe? Well, you can use them anytime you want to if you're selling them at farmer's market or that, but when about 2/3 of the top has fallen over, they're ripe. And, you know, we like to cure them. And then we can talk about that on another time, but, okay, so what do we have with them? Actually, onion maggot, if you're from seed, if you're from transplant, they're not. Once in a while, if on, you can look on the left, Botrytis here will dry down the leaves, but it takes a year where it's wet continually to really do that. Squash and pumpkins, kind of the same story as melons. So we won't spend a lot of time with them here, outside of the fact that pumpkins, there's so many varieties out there, and if you transplant on plastic, you can get so many of these ripe up here. So I definitely recommend trying to get your pumpkins in with transplants, and you can grow them yourself here. One of the biggest problems we have with pumpkins in squash is pollination. The flowers only have about a 3-hour chance to pollinate. That's usually in the morning from 9 to noon. If that flower doesn't get pollinated, it'll usually abort. And you can always tell the male flower from the female flower because the male flower will have a miniature pumpkin or cantaloupe or whatever is at the base of it. So you usually will get about 10 times more male flowers out there. And if the plant is stressed because of harsh growing and maybe too cold or too dry, it'll shoot out tons of male flowers and no female flowers. And I've had so many calls with people say, geez, it's just been in bloom, but there's absolutely no crop out there. Kind of the same story with some cucumbers here, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on that here. Lettuce, easy to grow. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. And I think with that, I'm going to call it a night here unless people have questions. One of the, in the back of your handout, I do have vegetable and small fruit. They're actually just vegetables. I didn't include the small fruit till 2 weeks from now. But these are varieties that we've tested and have actually done well here in northern Minnesota. So just kind of a guide here for those of you that are starting out that, you know, to go ahead and try some of these varieties. And I'm sure not saying there's not others that really won't work. So you want to take it over? Thank you very much, Linda.
Thanks, Terry. Let's give Terry That was a lot of information about vegetables. Thank you, Terry. I want to remind each of the hosts to hand out evaluation forms. Make sure you collect those. I'm also asking hosts to do a count to see if anyone in your room needs a binder. Count up how many you need and let me know maybe by email, or you can just write a note in with your evaluations and send those. We'll get some more printed and we'll ship those out at the end of the week so you have them next week.